So let me paint you a picture. You're 22 years old, you just walked across a stage, shook someone's hand, got handed a rolled up piece of paper inside a fancy tube, and your family is crying in the audience. Your mom is taking 17 photos at once, your dad is trying to figure out how to use portrait mode. And you're standing there in this polyester robe that cost you $40 to rent, thinking, okay, I did it. Now the money comes. And then it doesn't. You send out 47 applications, you hear back from maybe 6. 3 of those are unpaid internships. 1 of them is in a city where rent alone would swallow your entire hypothetical salary. You eventually land something, and look, you're grateful, genuinely, but the salary is $38,000 a year before taxes, and your student loan payment kicks in at $412 a month, and you're sitting at your kitchen table one night with your laptop open, doing the math on a napkin, and you realize, I am somehow broker now than when I was a teenager working at a pizza place. That feeling, that specific, confused, slightly embarrassed feeling, that's what I want to talk about today. My name is Emmy, and honestly, I spend probably too much time thinking about money, not just the numbers side of it, but the psychology of it, the sociology of it, why some people walk out of their 20s with a foundation already built underneath them, while others spend a decade just trying to get back to zero. I find it endlessly fascinating, and also, at times, genuinely infuriating. And one of the things that keeps coming up over and over when I dig into why smart, hardworking people end up financially stuck is this very specific cultural story we've been told about college degrees. Now, and I want to be careful here because this is going to get nuanced. I'm not going to stand here and tell you education is bad. That would be too simple and, honestly, kind of dumb. What I am going to tell you is that the way most people use college, and more importantly, the reasons most people go, have quietly become one of the most effective wealth transfer mechanisms in modern history, and not in your favor. By the end of this, I think you're going to look at the whole get a degree, get a good job, build a good life pipeline very differently. Not cynically, I don't want to leave you feeling hopeless, but clearly. Because there's a real difference between education and what we've turned college into, and understanding that difference might genuinely be one of the most financially important things you do this year. Let's get into it. The story we were sold. So here's where it starts. Somewhere around the mid-20th century, a college degree actually was a reliable ticket to the middle class. The economy was structured differently. There were fewer graduates. A degree was rare enough that it genuinely signaled something, and employers rewarded that signal with stable, well-paying jobs and pensions that would carry you through retirement. The math worked. You go in, you come out, you're good. The problem is that the story got passed down, parent to child, teacher to student, counselor to teenager, long after the underlying economics changed. We kept telling the same story with the same confidence, even as the price of the ticket went up by 1,200% since the 1980s, even as the job market got restructured, even as wages stagnated. The story stayed the same. The world did not. And here's the sneaky part. The story is just true enough to be convincing. College graduates, on average, do earn more over a lifetime than non-graduates. That's a real statistic. But averages hide so much. If 5 people in a room each have $1 and one person has $1 million, the average wealth in that room is almost $167,000. Nobody actually has that. Averages lie by omission, and what they're omitting here is something pretty significant. The degree field, the debt load, the opportunity cost, the specific job market you're entering, and whether you actually needed that credential to do what you ended up doing. When you break the numbers down that way, honestly and completely, the picture gets a lot more complicated. A nursing degree? Great investment. An engineering degree from a state school where you kept costs manageable? Solid. A $180,000 private university fine arts degree that leads to a $32,000 a year job? Mathematically, that could take you 30 years to recover from. 30 years. Think about that. That's not a head start. That's a penalty. Okay, so here's a thing I want you to really sit with, because I think it reframes the whole conversation. When we talk about student loans, we usually talk about them as a tool, like you're using debt to finance an investment in yourself, and then the degree pays it back. That's the framing. And that framing isn't entirely wrong, but it leaves out something important. Student debt, in the form it exists today, is not primarily designed to help you. It's designed to keep the current system funded. Universities need tuition revenue to maintain their endowments, their buildings, their administrative bloat, which, by the way, university administrative staff has grown at about 5 times the rate of faculty over the past few decades, which is something. All those vice presidents of student engagement and associate deans of campus culture need salaries, and the way those salaries get paid is through your tuition. And the way you pay your tuition, since wages haven't kept up with tuition costs and most families can't write a check, is through loans. And the beautiful, terrible genius of federally backed student loans is that they're almost impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. Your car loan, your mortgage, your credit card debt, all of that can be wiped in a bankruptcy proceeding. Student loans, in almost every circumstance, cannot, which means lenders have almost zero risk, which means they'll lend to anyone for anything, which means there's no market pressure to keep tuition affordable, which means prices just keep going up, and you keep borrowing, and the cycle continues. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just incentives playing out logically. Nobody sat in a room and decided to trap an entire generation, but the structure does trap people, and understanding the structure is how you stop being trapped by it. The practical takeaway here, if you're still deciding about school, or if you have kids who are approaching that age, is that the most important financial decision you'll make about college happens before you enroll. It's the cost structure. A $15,000 a year state school where you can live at home and work part-time is a fundamentally different financial decision than a $55,000 a year private school, even if they both hand you the same sounding degree at the end. The credential isn't worth the same amount in every package it comes in. The debt, though, that part is very real, no matter where it comes from. Credential inflation and the degree treadmill. So here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The more common degrees become, the less each individual degree is worth as a signal. This is just supply and demand applied to credentials. When only 5% of the population had a bachelor's degree, that degree said something specific and meaningful to an employer. Now, with roughly 40% of adults holding a degree, it says less. It's still better than nothing in many fields, but it's no longer the differentiator it once was. And so, what happened? The goalposts moved. Now you need a master's degree to get the kind of consideration a bachelor's used to give you. In some fields, a master's is table stakes just to get an interview. So people go back to school, they borrow more money, they spend more time out of the workforce, or in it at a reduced level because they're studying, and then, eventually, we'll probably have people saying you need a doctorate to be taken seriously in fields where a high school diploma used to do the job. This is called credential inflation, and it's a brutal, slow tax on ambition. I think about this a lot when I see people in their late 20s deciding to go back for a master's degree because they feel stuck. And look, sometimes that's the right call, genuinely. In medicine, in law, in specialized technical fields, advanced degrees open real doors. But a shocking number of people go back to school because they don't know what else to do, because they've been taught that more education is always the answer, because going back to school feels like action when it's actually just delay dressed up in an academic calendar. More education is not always the answer. Sometimes the answer is stop acquiring credentials and start acquiring skills, experience, and relationships. Those 3 things, done right, compound in ways that no degree program can replicate.
Okay, this one genuinely makes my brain itch when I think about it, because we talk about the cost of college all the time. Tuition, fees, room and board, the textbook that's $40 new and inexplicably $38.50 used. We count those, but there's another cost that's basically never mentioned in any college brochure, and it's arguably the most significant one. What could you have been doing instead? So let's say you spend 4 years in college, graduating at 22. During that time, in addition to whatever you paid in tuition, you also didn't earn a full-time income. Let's say conservatively that's $30,000 a year you weren't earning, $120,000 over 4 years, and you weren't investing that money, and you weren't building professional experience in a meaningful way, and you weren't building a network through actual work. That $120,000, if you'd started investing at 18 instead of 22, would have significantly more time to compound.
I'm not saying work is always better than college. I'm saying the math of I'll invest in my education now and it'll pay off later is real, but it needs to include the full cost, which means including everything you didn't earn and didn't do and didn't build while you were writing papers and attending lectures. Most people never run that calculation. They just look at the tuition bill and call that the cost. The full cost is much higher. And the corollary to this is something I find really interesting, which is the people who tend to build wealth earliest are almost never the people who stayed in school longest. They're usually the people who started doing actual things earliest, building small businesses, learning trades, getting into real estate young, developing skills with direct market value. They made mistakes earlier, which means they learned earlier, which means they compounded faster. There's a concept in finance called the time value of money. $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow because of what you can do with it right now. The exact same principle applies to experience. A year of real-world experience at 21 is worth more than a year of real-world experience at 27, not because you're smarter or more capable at 21, but because you have more runway to build on it. What college actually teaches and what it doesn't. I want to be fair here, because I don't think college is entirely without value. Obviously, there are things universities do well. They provide structured exposure to ideas you might not have encountered otherwise. They build a certain kind of analytical thinking. They create social environments that, for a lot of people, are genuinely formative. And for some fields, medicine, engineering, research science, the technical depth you get in a good program is real and necessary. But here's what's interesting. The things most people actually use day to day in their professional and financial lives, negotiation, sales, communication, understanding how businesses work, managing money, reading contracts, understanding taxes, building relationships, managing uncertainty. Almost none of this is taught in college, not really. I graduated knowing how to write a decent analytical essay and having a vague understanding of macroeconomics. I did not know how to negotiate a salary. I did not know how to read a lease agreement. I did not understand compound interest in any practical way. I could not have told you the difference between an LLC and an S-corp. Nobody taught me any of that, and yet those are exactly the things that determine, in large part, whether your financial life goes well or not. This is the funny, kind of tragic gap at the center of the whole conversation. College prepares you, in theory, for a career, but it almost entirely ignores the financial life that runs alongside and underneath that career. And then people get out, start earning money, have no framework for any of it, make a bunch of expensive mistakes, and nobody connects those mistakes back to the education they just paid a fortune for. Financial literacy, practical negotiation, how to evaluate a business opportunity, how to read a financial statement. These things are worth more in real terms to the average person's net worth than almost anything else they could learn, and they're essentially absent from the standard curriculum. The social pressure trap. Here's the thing about all this that I find genuinely heartbreaking sometimes. A lot of people don't go to college because they've carefully weighed the options and decided it's the right investment. They go because everyone expected them to, because their parents expected it, because their high school ran on the assumption that college was the default and anything else was settling, because saying "I'm not going to college" in most middle-class households is still treated as approximately equivalent to saying "I've decided to give up." And so you have millions of 18-year-olds making one of the largest financial decisions of their lives, a decision that will shape their cash flow for the next decade or more, not based on a clear-eyed analysis of their goals, their options, their risk tolerance, or their specific situation, but based on social pressure and the fear of being judged. That's not a knock on those people. I understand it completely. When you're 17 and the entire world around you is organized around college as the obvious next step, it takes a kind of independent thinking that most adults don't have, let alone teenagers. The pressure is real. The social cost of diverging is real. But the financial cost of conforming when it doesn't make sense for your situation is also very, very real, and I think we need to get more honest about that. The antidote to this, practically speaking, is to start asking a question that almost nobody asks at 18. What specific outcome am I trying to achieve, and is this the most effective path to it? Not where is everyone else going, not what would disappoint my parents the least, but what do I actually want and what's the most effective route there? Sometimes it's college, sometimes it's a trade, sometimes it's starting a business, traveling, working, figuring yourself out for a year or two before committing. All of those can be valid, but you can only see that if you're asking the actual question instead of just following the script. Okay, let's talk about something that I think is genuinely exciting because this part of the conversation tends to get left out. While everyone's been crowding into four-year colleges, something interesting has been happening in trades and skilled work. There's a massive shortage of electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, welders, and other skilled tradespeople in basically every developed country. Massive. We're talking about industries where experienced workers are earning six figures, often without a college degree, often with their own businesses, often with more financial stability than the average law school graduate. An electrician apprenticeship in the U.S. typically takes 4 to 5 years. During that time, you're earning while you learn, usually starting around $18 to $22 an hour and increasing as you progress. You finish the program with a journeyman's license, no debt, and several years of real experience. Compare that to someone who spent 5 years getting a degree, accumulated $60,000 in debt, and is now starting an entry-level job. Who's actually in the better financial position right now? The trade path isn't for everyone, I understand that, but the cultural disdain for it, this lingering, unspoken hierarchy where white-collar is aspirational and blue-collar is somehow lesser, is costing people real money, and it's based on a social prejudice, not on reality. Reality says a master plumber who starts their own business can build serious, lasting wealth. Reality says the skills economy is growing, not shrinking.
I think one of the genuinely healthy shifts happening right now is that more people are starting to see this. The learn-to-code era ran headlong into the realities of AI and outsourcing. The just-get-your-MBA era ran headlong into the realities of credential inflation and debt. People are looking around, and some of them are looking at skilled trades with fresh eyes. And good, it's long overdue. How to actually use education well. So at this point, you might be wondering, okay, Emmy, so what do I actually do? And this is where I want to get practical because I don't want this to just be a critique without anything to build on. First, before you take out $1 in student loans, ask yourself, is this the credential I need to do the thing I want to do? Or is it the credential that I think society expects me to have? Those are wildly different reasons, and they should lead to wildly different decisions. Second, if you do go to college, treat it like a financial decision rather than a rite of passage. That means choose the school based on value, not prestige. Attend a state school if the quality is comparable. Live at home if you can. Work part-time. Graduate in 4 years or less. Apply for every scholarship that exists.
The version of college where you go somewhere beautiful and expensive and find yourself over 4 relaxed years and your parents or loans cover everything, that version has become a luxury that most people can't afford and still come out ahead financially. You can get a great education without financing the university's new sports complex. Third, learn the things college won't teach you: financial literacy, negotiation, how business actually works, sales. These are learnable outside of formal education, through books, through online courses, through mentors, through just doing things and paying attention. Don't wait for a curriculum to give you permission to learn them. Fourth, recognize that your earning trajectory has much more to do with your skills, reputation, and network than with the credential on your wall. The degree might get you in the door. What happens after that is all you. So while you're acquiring the credential, also be acquiring relationships, real skills, and a track record of doing good work. Those things, not the diploma, are what actually compound over time. And fifth, and this one's quieter, but I think it's the most important, give yourself permission to take a different path if a different path makes more sense for your life. You don't owe anyone a conventional biography. The people who build real financial lives usually do it by figuring out what they're actually good at and then finding the most direct route to doing that thing. Not the most socially acceptable route, the most direct one. Coming back to that 22-year-old. I keep thinking back to the image I started with, that person standing on the stage in the rented robe, expecting the money to come. And I want to be clear, that person didn't do anything wrong. They followed the instructions, they did what they were told, they worked hard, and they graduated, and they showed up. The problem isn't that they tried. The problem is that the instructions were incomplete. Nobody told them to interrogate the cost. Nobody told them to run the full math. Nobody told them about the trades or entrepreneurship or the skills economy or credential inflation or the opportunity cost of 4 years. They got half the story, the aspirational half, the shiny half, and they made a huge decision based on that. And now they're sitting with a loan payment and an entry-level salary and this low-grade confusion, like, I did everything right, why does this feel wrong? I want that person to know, and maybe that person is you or someone you love, that the confusion makes complete sense. The map was wrong. That's not a character flaw. And the good news is that once you see the map more clearly, you can start navigating more accurately. You can make different choices going forward. You can start building differently. The debt might take time to pay down. The years might not come back. But the clarity? That's available right now, and clarity is where everything better begins. A quiet closing thought. We live in a society that is very comfortable telling young people what success looks like, but very uncomfortable having honest conversations about what it actually costs. College got woven into the success narrative so completely that questioning it started to feel like heresy. And that silence, that cultural unwillingness to examine the story critically, has been quietly expensive for an enormous number of people. What I hope you take away from this isn't cynicism. I really don't. Cynicism is cheap and it doesn't help you build anything. What I hope you take away is a slightly more accurate map, a few better questions to ask, the permission to think about your own education and career path as a genuine strategic decision rather than a social obligation. Because here's the thing I believe deeply after spending so much time thinking about this stuff. Wealth isn't really built by following the most popular path. It's built by finding the most effective path and having the self-awareness to know which one that is for you specifically in your specific situation with your specific strengths and goals and constraints. Sometimes that's college, sometimes it isn't. The important thing is that it's a real, eyes-open choice, not a default, not something you drifted into because it was next in the sequence, a genuine, thoughtful, financially informed decision. You're allowed to make that decision for yourself. Actually, you're the only one who can.